So for the record, I'm not an either or guy. I believe it's a both and thing. I think we need to have both tracks, have a great, amazing, compelling service in the building and invite people and build that community. But at the same time, we need to have just as a compelling online experience.
Well, hey there, friends. Welcome to Season 2, Episode 3 of the Missional Marketing Church Growth Interviews Podcast. Bart Blair and Jason Hamrock joining you here from Frisco, Texas, and from somewhere in the Arizona. Phoenix. Is your address Phoenix proper? One
of those. It's actually Gilbert. So
okay.
Gilbert's a suburb, but it's huge now.
Yeah, I mean, I could have said Dallas, but I said Frisco because, well, I live in Frisco, and I didn't think you lived in Phoenix proper. You've never invited me to your house, but I'll be there someday.
You're always invited, Bart. If you're in the neck. Come on by.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
Elizabeth, your wife. Yeah. Just come on by.
Yeah. You retiled your whole house last year. Was it like this time last year? You were like tearing out all the tile in your house, right? And you retiled your whole house. Yeah. So I haven't had a chance to see all this beautiful tile. I guess that's kind of a common thing when you live in a hot climate like Phoenix. People put like ceramic tile or porcelain tile or whatever on the floor to help keep your house cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Get rid of all the carpet.
Yeah, I have no idea why we're talking about that. Let's talk about our podcast. Hey, who's our guest today?
Man, I am excited about this one. Okay, Phil Cooke is on the podcast today, and Phil is an amazing guy. I've read a lot of Phil's books. In fact, I got one right here, Branding Faith. But he's written One Big Thing. He just came out with his latest book, Maximizing Your Influence. But he's so much more than that. He's a producer. He's done all kinds of stuff. Bart can share a little bit about that. But I tell you, this conversation with Phil, he's just a genuinely great guy. He's such a nice guy. And we learned a ton from him. We had to stop it because we could have kept going on and on and on with Phil. Such a generous man. So what else has he done that our audience needs to know about?
Well, we could go on and on. He actually, he actually offered to hang out with me the next time he's in Dallas. And I am 100% going to take him up on that because he's just an absolutely cool guy. Phil Cooke Media Group and his team they produced content for the Bible Museum in Washington, D.C., the American Bible Society, Jesus Film Project. He's done work with Dreamworks. He's done work with Disney. Like this guy, when it comes to film work and production work, he's legit. He is the real deal. But what's so cool about Phil Cooke is that even though he's kind of got this Hollywood aura and this Hollywood community that he works in, he's totally down to earth and he's totally passionate about the local church and helping churches, church communications professionals, and church leaders maximize their influence. In fact, that's the name of his latest book, Maximize Your Influence. And that is what we primarily discussed in our conversation with Phil Cooke. So Phil, thanks. If you happen to listen to this, thanks for hanging out with us. Thanks for spending the time with us that you did. If you are listening to our podcast, but maybe the first time, or maybe you haven't yet subscribed, make sure you do that on whatever platform that you listen to our podcast on. Make sure that you subscribe so that you don't miss any episodes. And if you haven't left us a rating or review, please do that. If you leave us a really awesome review, we might even read it and share it with our audience, just in case that might matter to you. I hear other people doing that on their podcast. Yeah. We've never actually done it. So I thought I'd throw that out there. I might even, if you leave us a really cool review, I might get Jason to send you a t-shirt. I'm just saying, a Missional Marketing t-shirt. Wouldn't that be cool? Not the golf shirt. The golf shirts are probably a little pricey for us to
we got some really cool t-shirts around here. So yes.
Because we're a low budget podcast, so we can't send you really nice gifts, but we can afford a t-shirt. But anyway, all that being said, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for your feedback. We love the feedback that we're getting on the podcast and that you're finding what we're producing for you here useful. And this rambling is not useful, so I'm going to cut it short and just say, hey, let's listen to this interview with Phil Cooke. Well, Phil Cooke, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the Missional Marketing Church Growth Interviews Podcast. Thanks so much for being our guest today.
Hey, I'm thrilled to be here. I'm honored. This is going to be fun. I love talking to guys that are into media and communication stuff. So this will be great.
Well, we're delighted to have you. Most of our audience are people who are church leaders, church communications professionals, some in large churches, some in very small churches, longtime churches like Moody in Chicago, and brand new church plants in cities all over the country. I would imagine that many of them probably have heard of you. Maybe they don't know a ton about you. Why don't you spend a few minutes just sharing your story, how you got into the stuff that you're doing today, and actually explain a little bit about what you're doing today.
Sure. I'm a preacher's kid from Charlotte, North Carolina. My dad was a pastor my whole life. I've worked behind the scenes in church since I was born. I have filled millions of communion cups. I have printed thousands of bulletins. I mowed the church cemetery for years. When I went to college, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was never felt called to preach. I knew everything about church and how it worked, but I never felt called to preach. So I just was I started college as a music major, because that's what you did back in those days. If you were a preacher's kid, you played the piano. Yeah. And but one thing I did is kind of a hobby. Me and 3 or 4 buddies in high school used to take my dad's Super 8 movie camera. Yep, that's how old I am. And we would go out and make little 3-minute movies, army movies, mafia movies, space movies, and we just had a great time doing it. We didn't know anything about it. It never crossed our mind that you could do this for a living, but we just loved doing it. So when I went to college, I thought, well, I'll take my dad's camera and I'll take my movies, and maybe I'll find some guys in college. I went 1,000 miles away to college, and I thought, well, maybe I'll find some guys that want to do that there. And literally the first day I'm unpacking my suitcase and a couple of my little films rolled out, and a guy across the hall said, "Hey, I'm taking a film class. I can show you how to edit those things." I didn't even know you could cut film back in those days. And so he took me down there, and to make a long story short, we worked late into the night working on one of my little movies. And I discovered the professor was there. He was there working on a project of his own. And as he was leaving late that night, he walked by our little edit table and introduced himself and said, "Look, I've been watching your little film out of the corner of my eye." And he said, "I've got students that have been taking for 2-3 years of classes, and they don't do this well. Would you mind if I showed your film in my class tomorrow?" So I said, "Yeah. And if I could sit on the back row." So the next day I sat on the back row. He showed my little movie, and trust me, it was nothing to scream about. But when it was over, the class started talking about it. They started discussing it. And I'll tell you something, a idea hit me. It was like a revelation, like I've never had before or since, this crystal clear moment of revelation that if I can do something with a camera that makes people talk like this is what I'm supposed to do with my life. And I literally changed my major that day to film, TV, communications, and I've never looked back. And although I've owned commercial companies, we've done Super Bowl commercials, we've done all kind of secular projects over the years, I've always just gravitated toward the church because I've always felt the church needed to understand how to tell their story more effectively using media. And so over the years, we've worked with most major ministry organizations, ton of effective large churches and small churches as well. And it's just interesting to see how God has used that. Media's come a long way in my long career, and I'm just thrilled to be a part of it.
So are you doing more storytelling when you step into these churches and help them out, or what's the?
Yeah, usually when pastors will call us, they're frustrated about something. As you guys probably know, they're frustrated about their media. We do a lot of broadcast television with clients. We do a lot of short videos with clients and other things. But I've gotten into this role where I'm the guy that kind of the hub that brings everybody to the table, the website people, the social media people, the video people, the broadcast TV people, if that's part of it. And I just kind of manage the process of how it goes. I come from the creative side of the fence. I'm a writer, and I've been producing forever and directing a lot of television, but I'm just have kind of grown into a role where I kind of become the hub. I go into a lot of churches where nobody talks to each other. The web guy's not talking to the social media people who aren't talking to the video guy who's not talking to the pastor, and they're all telling different stories. And I've discovered the key is we've got to get them all together on the same page, reflecting the same vision, the same message, the same story. And when that happens, incredible things suddenly start beginning.
So you've written a lot of books. So I mean, if you gotta Google Phil, and Phil Cooke with an E on the end, right? So just go to philcooke.com. You're going to see all of the books he's written. You have written a lot of great books that speak into leadership, structure, all these different things that you're talking about in your books. Yep. Where did you gain all that? If you're a filmmaker, is it just from your years of experience of working in a church?
A lot of it's hitting my head against the wall, working with churches and ministries over the years. I mean, literally, I started a long, long time ago. I started Actually, like to give you a little secret, I started producing programs, directing programs for Oral Roberts back in the days when you'll remember Oral, Billy, Fulton Sheen on the Catholic side. They were all doing national television programs, and Oral's was the most watched program in America at the time. So when I was a student, my freshman year, I actually went to Oral Roberts University. In my freshman year, Oral built a massive studio complex on the campus at ORU, brought in heads of departments from NBC and other places in Hollywood, the director, the art director, the lighting director. And I got a job on the crew as a grip, just moving set pieces around and worked my way up to the lighting crew, then became a camera operator. Eventually the director, I got a chance to be the assistant director of the program. And then when the director left, they moved me up into the director's position. So I go all the way back there. And so since that time, I've worked with just more ministries and churches than I care to admit, and seen a lot of changes. I mean, when you think about it, a lot of changes have happened in media during that time. So a lot of it just comes out from the agony of working with an awful lot of people over the years.
It's beautiful and it's a mess all at the same time.
It is. It's yes, exactly right.
So Phil, you obviously work hands-on with a lot of churches. You've got your hands in a lot of different things, and we could take this conversation in a lot of different directions. Obviously, you know, one of the things that you help a lot of churches with is communications, with their production, with their media production. And a year and a half ago, the world went into COVID mode, and churches had to start making a lot of significant changes and pivots, additions, subtractions, you name it. Why don't you share a little bit with us about some of the stuff that you were doing hands-on to help churches in that transition? And then I'd like for you to also speak into maybe how some of the things that you've seen change in the church over the course of the last year and a half might be permanent change.
That's a great question. It's funny. We've been working with live streaming with churches for many, many years, long before COVID anybody ever knew about COVID. And in fact, we've had multiple churches that we were working with years ago that were making as much as a third of their total financial income just from their live stream audience. We helped them tweak their live stream to where the audience really felt engaged. The pastor respected the audience. He talked to them. We've even had numerous churches where in the middle of the praise and worship, the pastor will walk off to the side of the stage, look at a camera and welcome the audience and tell them how grateful he is that they're a part of this. And audience, the people watching feel like, hey, this church respects me. They value me and they want to be a part of that congregation. So we'd had some great success with live streaming long before COVID. But when COVID came along and the churches started getting locked down, I frankly thought we'd be out of business. But suddenly we got flooded with calls from pastors who had no clue what they were doing or no idea how to live stream, or the ones that were live streaming, how do they take it to the next level? I had some pastors before the shutdown tell me, Phil, I don't mind live streaming my service, but that's not real ministry. Let me tell you, when that lockdown happened, they completely changed their tune. And so we just jumped right in, and it was really interesting. I started by watching every Sunday during the lockdown. I would watch 10, 12, maybe 15 live streams. I would just one after another. And it was just interesting to see how different churches were doing it, which ones were doing it well and which weren't. And out of that experience and working with the churches that we work with, in fact, I'll tell you, we had 3 churches during the lockdown that got such a great response from their live stream, they decided to go on broadcast television in their city. And so it's just interesting what's come out of this whole COVID thing. And so I wrote the book, Maximize Your Influence, out of that experience, because I started realizing, as you well know, they don't teach pastors communication and media stuff in Bible college or seminary. And somebody needs to be out there. So I really wanted to create a reference book that every pastor in America could have on his desk, that when these issues came up, and they're not about how to build a website or how to set up a social media platform, they're more about how to speak that language, how to talk to your communications team, and really why we're doing this. What's the point of this? So many churches I go into, I'm sure you've seen this, they're doing everything. They just don't really have a good idea of why they're doing it or what the strategy is behind it. So that's a big part of why I wrote the book.
Yeah, how to do it well either.
That's true. That's true.
I want to talk about the book in just a moment, but I actually want to get you to, there's a thread that I want to cut and pull on something that you said just a minute ago. And you were sharing some of the experience of how some churches had built such a strong online presence or a broadcast presence, that a significant amount of their donation and revenue was coming from their online audience because they were tailoring their experience to meet the needs of both the people in the room and the people online.
Yes.
Can you speak for a minute to just the importance that churches need to place on creating an experience for the online audience and not just a fly on the wall experience for people who are watching online?
Yeah, live streaming is so much more than hanging a little camera from the edge of the balcony. There are just so many pastors that don't take that seriously. And yet there are people out there watching. The success stories we've heard during the lockdown have absolutely been amazing. We worked with one church, an African-American church in the South, 900 members. The pastor called me about 6 months into the lockdown and said, he really embraced this. And he called me and said, before the lockdown, he said, we had 28 subscribers to our YouTube channel. He said, now we have 23,000. He said, we have 900 church members, but every Sunday, 30 to 40,000 people are watching our live stream. And he said, up to now, he said, 1.5 million people have seen my Easter message on YouTube. He said, I'm a pastor, so I feel guilty saying this, but I have no real desire to go back to our church building. He said, we're making more of an impact online than we've ever made in the history of our church. So for the record, I'm not an either or guy. I believe it's a both and thing. I think we need to have both tracks, have a great, amazing, compelling service in the building and invite people and build that community. But at the same time, we need to have just as a compelling online experience. Craig Rochelle at Life Church calls it a hybrid. And I totally agree. He wants the live experience, the live online experience to be just as compelling as being in the service. And I sometimes think of sports, football games. I'm a big college football fan. And when you go to a stadium to see the game live, that's a thrilling thing and it's wonderful and you have a great time. However, there are things when you're at home watching it on TV, you get to see even more stuff. You get to see replays, you get to see in-depth interviews, you get to see backgrounds on different players. So both experiences need to be absolutely maxed out to make it effective. And for the record, I'll tell you, in my experience, I'm believing that we'll have a significant number of people that will probably cut back in-person worship one Sunday a month, maybe 2 Sundays a month, and stay at home and watch. I've had a lot of pastors tell me, Phil, I spent almost 2 years telling people how awesome online worship is. How in the world am I ever going to get them back in the church? My first response is, if that's all that gets them in, you've got bigger problems. If they just watch stuff, and you got bigger problems than that. But the second thing is, you need to make that online experience compelling. In fact, this is not the time, for what it's worth, this is not the time to take your foot off the gas when it comes to your live stream. I think it's going to be more important than ever as we go into the future.
Yeah, it's really important that you say that, because before COVID, the sacred cow was getting them into the room, and rightfully so. It's like your biggest giving, it all happens right there. COVID happens. Now they're online. And it is interesting to hear churches go, yeah, we're really cutting back on the online because we can get back in person.
Yeah.
Going, why are you lifting that sacred cow back up? Like, come on. They need to tune in and talk to you, because it's like what you were saying there, and the amount of, like, a small church.
Yeah.
But preaching the gospel and using media to convey a message, and it's exploding.
Well, for the record, let me just say that when it comes to small churches, don't think you can't do this because you don't have a 10-man communication team or 5 cameras or more. Everybody today has a studio in their pocket. I mean, literally in their pocket. There are 2 feature film festivals in America now for feature films shot on iPhones. In fact, I have a friend who's a camera operator. She's a director of photography, and she's built her whole business around filming all of her projects on an iPhone. She's got this amazing rig that she uses and slops the iPhone in there, and she shoots on that. So the truth is, you have no excuse anymore. There's no reason, even with no budget, just pull your phone out and you can do some really remarkable things.
I want to take a moment to thank you for tuning in to the Missional Marketing Podcast. It's always our goal to help you as a church leader leverage your communications and digital media resources to reach more people for Jesus. One of the ways that we help churches do that is through creating social media content from your Sunday sermon videos. Specifically, what we can do for you is to create short sermon snippets from 30 seconds long to 5 minutes long, capturing those mic drop moments that you really want people to remember. We edit the videos, add captions, add your church branding, and then you or we post them to your social media channels. As a pastor, I always love to see my sermon content live on beyond the Sundays, and I know that's what you value for your sermons too. We offer this service as a monthly subscription, but we've got a 6-week trial that gives you a chance to see how it works. If you'd like more information, just shoot me an email at bblair@missionalmarketing.com. I'd be glad to meet with you, explain the process, and answer any questions that you have. Once again, thanks for tuning into our podcast. Let's get back to the interview. I will testify. As a pastor myself, I have to say, there's really nothing for me that can replace or replicate the incarnational experience of the church body being together. But I will speak from firsthand that, as a pastor, even before we were, really able to pull out all the stops on a church online type of experience.
Yeah.
Between my 12-year-old son operating a camera and my son-in-law, who's going to be editing this podcast, the two of them, we were posting content online, which led to people finding our content online, engaging in new relationship, and actually having incarnational connection at some point. It wasn't overnight. In one case, and I tell this story over and over again, so I won't tell this story now, but it was a full year. I had a couple tell me they'd been watching online before they ever took the chance of stepping into the space where we were meeting in person. But once they did, it was a life-changing experience for them. And that life change started not the minute they walked in the door, but when they discovered our teaching online and began to engage with us online. So you're right. I think it's just part of what we have to see as a holistic ministry effort now. It can't all be in person. It can't all be in line. We have to figure out how to make those two things work together for the sake of the kingdom and for people who are far from God.
That's really good. One of the most exciting things I'm seeing that kind of gets my blood pumping is the number of pastors who are saying, I was telling this story recently that I have a friend who was a baseball player. He got hit in the head with a line drive and everybody panicked and it knocked him out and they rushed him to the hospital and they did a CAT scan and they did all the procedures and stuff and realized, eventually he came to and he was okay. And there was no problem from that baseball hit. However, the CAT scan discovered he had a tiny tumor deep into his brain. And the doctor said, they found it early only because of the baseball hit. And he did the CAT scan. They found it early enough that they could take it out. And the doctor said any later, it would have grown to a place and where it was located, they could have never taken it out and it would have killed him. And I often think COVID is that baseball just slamming right into our head here because it's showing us new ways of doing things. It's shaking us up and making us look at things differently. I've had so many pastors tell me, now that I've started live streaming, I realize we've been doing church the same way for 200 or 300 years. I mean, we may have switched to contemporary music, but our order of service is pretty much the same. We're still in a sanctuary. We're doing this. Most of the things we do is almost identical in our lifetime and far beyond. And so I'm seeing pastors, for instance, there's a group of pastors that are kind of following a Catholic daily mass and model. And what they're doing is every morning at 7:00, they're having a group of people that they do ministry and worship and teaching to online on a Facebook group. And one pastor I know in Florida has 300 or 400 people every morning that meet him at 7 a.m., Monday through Friday. And then 3,000 or 4,000 will watch it replayed over the course of the day. Another pastor has been doing communion for 340 days in a row. One pastor I talked to at the big church in the South is he's going to continue live streaming for 3 Sundays, even though they don't have to. He's going to keep live streaming for 3 Sundays a month. And then the fourth weekend, on Friday night, they're going to have a big worship concert. On Saturday, the congregation is going into the streets to do heavy duty ministry to people. And then they'll have a big blowout worship service in their church. So whether you like those ideas or not, it's really interesting to me that pastors are suddenly thinking, hey, why do we keep doing this the same old way? Maybe it's time to shake things up and look for other ways that we can share the gospel in a more powerful way with people. So I think that's really fascinating to me.
Yeah.
Love it. We could talk about that all day long, but I do want to get to the book. Jason, why don't you help us transition into the conversation about the book now?
Yeah. So, you kind of mentioned who you wrote the book for, right? In fact, I think it's any church staff. I mean, honestly, you need to get your hands on this book and read it.
Maximizing your influence. That's the name of the book.
Maximizing your influence.
Yeah. I've got mine on my Kindle. I've got mine on my Kindle, so you can't really see
on my phone, on my Kindle. It's right there.
Okay.
So, hey, there's multiple ways you get your hands on this book. So you communication directors, and I'm a former communication director. And I get to talk with communication directors all day long, and it's a joy. They're the second most influential person in the church.
Yeah.
Explain.
Well, the fact is, it's a communication. It's funny. Most churches, a lot of churches that I've been into over the years, the communication director isn't even allowed a seat at the table. It's just funny that
Right.
everybody's in there. The youth director's there. The pastor has a staff meeting. Everybody comes, but the media or communication guys are just kind of left in the wind. And yet, it's the communication team that's responsible for taking that pastor's message and getting it far beyond the walls of the church to hundreds, thousands, potentially millions of people out there. So I'll tell you what, in the churches that I work with that are doing some amazing things and incredibly effective, in almost every case, the communication director is probably the second most influential person in the church. Certainly an executive pastor runs the place, and that's all important and really great. But I'll tell you, that communications director job is to really enhance the message that pastor shares, which means they have to be in close communication. They have to be on the same wavelength. They need to be talking back and forth with suggestions going back and forth. So I just think that we don't realize just how important that communication director's role really is in a church setting.
Well, you're my new favorite person.
And you know what? And probably a lot of people listening to this podcast are going, yes, I should get my senior pastor and my executive pastor to
let me give you a tip.
Listen to this podcast.
Let me give you a tip real quick here, Jason. A lot of these communication directors will tell me, particularly media guys, will tell me, the pastor doesn't listen to me. He didn't meet with me. He's not, we never get together on stuff. Well, the problem is, in most cases, the communication person or the media person is speaking their language when they go to a pastor. Let me tell you, a pastor could care less about sound levels. He could care less about light levels. He doesn't care about video edits. He doesn't care about any of that technical stuff or what it takes to build a website. He doesn't care about analytics. All a pastor cares about is mission. He cares about ministry. So I always am telling media guys and communication guys, look, speak the pastor's language, and suddenly you're going to find out he's your best friend. And the other thing too is, feed him ideas. You should be constantly feeding the pastor and the teaching team ideas. You do those two things, and suddenly you'll be their best friend.
Yeah.
So this morning, this is very interesting. I walk most mornings, 3 or 4 or 5 miles, and I listen to podcasts, and I have a long list of podcasts that I listen to, and I'm usually, weeks behind as they're populating my phone. And ironically, this morning, I took off for my walk, and here I hear an interview with Phil Cooke and Katie Allred on the Church Communications podcast. And I'm like, oh, this is great. I'm going to listen to Phil talk about his book before I interview him about his book. One of the things that you talked about with Katie, and you did write about in the book, but you really fleshed this out really well in your interview, in the interview that she did with you, was on the centrality of the church's website, the importance of the church's website in relation to social media and other means of communication. Can you talk for a few minutes about why you think the church website is so important?
Yeah, I really feel like that the church website is the hub of everything a church does. It's interesting that when social media really exploded and became so popular, suddenly churches got on board with Instagram or Facebook or Twitter and other platforms, and they kind of left their website behind. But the truth is, as we've seen in the last year or two, social media platforms can censor you. They can delete you at a minute's notice, and everything you've built over all those years is suddenly gone. And yet your website is on a server, which hopefully was going to keep you on for a long, long time. Your live stream sits on your church website. So many things you do is on your website. And I have discovered that the vast majority of churches, vast majority of potential, one of the things I'm sorry, I'm not saying this very well, but one of the potential mistakes churches make is they don't realize that the vast majority of people will check them out online before they go visit church.
Yes.
And so I want your website to rock. That's number one. But number two, trust me, nobody at your church ever checks your church website. I mean, your church members know who the pastor is. They know where the church is located. They know when the Christmas pageant's coming up. They don't ever go to your website, but virtually all of potential new visitors will check the site before they come and visit, which means your website needs to really be focused on what it would take to get somebody to make that step to come and actually visit. So I just am a big believer that the website is the central focus of everything you do. You can have your social media on your website. You can do so many other short videos, sermon content, and other thing. I mean, I think YouTube channels and things like that are really critical, but I just think that it all starts with a church website and goes out from there.
Well, that's that kind of talk we do all the time with churches. So it's really good to have a guy like Phil Cooke back up what we tell churches every day, and that's your website. It's a growing, living thing, and it's not made for your people.
Yeah, that's so true. And there's a reason we call them web surfers and not web readers. So the pastor's biography should not be 4 pages long. Let me just tell you, everything needs to be cut way, way down because people just gloss over stuff, and make it simple, easy to find. The statistics of, statistics are overwhelming of the number of people that if they can't find it within a matter of seconds, they'll move on. So whatever you want them to do, grease the skids. That's one of the frustrating things about live streaming. I went to some websites during the lockdown. It took me 5, 6, 7 clicks, 7 different pages before I could finally get to their website. Let me tell you, put it out there on the homepage, get it out front on Sundays, because that's where it needs to be. Make it easy for people.
Yep. One click. Yep.
Okay. So one of the things that I highlighted in your book as I was reading it was something that you didn't say. You copied from somebody else, which is the
smartest thing I do.
Sign of a great leader. Right. One of your staff members. I did not write down who it was, but hopefully you remember the quote. You quoted this. She said, I believe it was a female on your team, said, "What holds many organizations back is simply being afraid of failure because others are watching." Yeah. I'm assuming you agree with that statement since you used it in your book, even though you didn't say it.
That's Dawn Nicole Baldwin, who is really brilliant at this stuff. I mean, she's absolutely brilliant. And she was the communication director at Willow Creek Church back in their heyday. She left them to go launch Veggie Tales nationwide to lead the team that did that. And more recently, she's been working with us for about 12 years. And she's just brilliant. She's exactly right. Say the quote again, because I think it's worth people listening.
What holds many organizations back is simply being afraid of failure because others are watching.
Yeah. Oh, man.
And I'll highlight this too. Others are watching because we're putting it all online now, right? I mean, it's all online. And so the risk is high, but the reward, I think, is also high.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of leadership teaching out there about learning from your mistakes, pushing the limits, constantly failing. I don't believe in a culture of failure, but I do believe if you're not failing every once in a while, you're not pushing hard enough. And she's exactly right. We're so worried about what other people think. And I actually think the greatest sin, short of maybe pride, might be comparison. And that probably is an offshoot of pride. We're just constantly trying to look so good in front of everybody else. And I think what the irony of all that is, one thing I've discovered online, particularly with social media, is the very thing that makes people want to connect with you is your imperfections. They want to see your authentic, real self. And so if we're constantly projecting this theme of how awesome we are, people, that turns people off really, really quick. I was talking to someone this morning about how pastors underbrag on social media. When a pastor will post, "Praise God, we had 5,000 cars in the parking lot today. God's really moving at this church." It's just kind of patting yourself on the back without sounding like it. Yeah. People know. So I think be real. Don't be afraid to show your mistakes. I think very often that's the most important thing to get people to want to connect with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, you write in the book, and you cite YouVersion and Life Church's development of YouVersion as a pivotal aspect of online and digital media. And Bobby Grunwald talks about the fact that the YouVersion Bible app came out of a failure. Like they had a completely different plan for what it was going to be, and YouVersion came out of a failure. I need to fail at something like that bounces that. I mean, that ball bounced high when it got dropped.
Sorry, I'm choking to death because that's so funny. One of the great things about Craig Rochelle is that he and Bobby have virtually created a research and development division at Life Church. I mean, they have a team of guys that's all they do is try stuff and see if it works or not, throw it up against the wall. And I wish more churches had that spirit. We're never going to push the envelope very far if we're not out there trying new things. And yet I still, after all the years I've been doing this, I still hear, "But Phil, that's the way we've always done it." And I just want to jump out a window whenever I hear that because it drives me nuts. So I'm a big believer in allowing your team enough rope to hang themselves. Let them go out there and try it. Let's see what happens and go from there.
Every business that's successful has been there.
Yeah.
Right.
True.
Yeah.
So true.
Organizationally, we work with hundreds of churches across the country, and we offer paid services to churches that need them because we want to help them get better at what they do. But one of the things that Jason has really led our organization well in is helping our team members really see themselves as coaches and cheerleaders first. And so when we're working with churches, we give away far more teaching, training, and coaching than we ever charge churches for. And so much of that is because what churches, church leaders, communications directors, what they need to know is really so much of it is at their fingertips, and so much of it is free and accessible to them. And one of the chapters that you wrote in the book is about non-budget marketing and promotion. There are ways for churches to actually market themselves, promote themselves, to do outreach without having to throw a lot of dollars behind it. Why don't you spend a few minutes just talking about some of the things that you've seen churches do, or that you would encourage churches to do to capitalize on the resources that are available that they don't have to pay for?
Well, I learned that principle years and years and years ago. When we first came to Los Angeles, many, many years ago, our pastor was Jack Hayford at Church on the Way here in Los Angeles. And he's just the Protestant Pope, as far as I'm concerned. I just adore Jack, and he's long since been retired from ministry. But when he launched Church on the Way, probably 50 years ago now, 40 or 50 years ago, when he first, in that first few years of launching the church, he called up the religion editor of the Los Angeles Times and said, "I'd like to take you to lunch." And so they went to lunch. And Jack said, "Look, I know you're having to cover every religious faith, every religious group there is, and you're probably overwhelmed." He said, "I'll tell you what, I would be happy to put my staff at your disposal anytime you need them. If you need research, if you need to have questions, or if you just want to find out about some things, or maybe network with somebody, you give me a call. Here's my phone. Give me a call anytime." Well, let me tell you, since that time, Jack Hayford has been quoted in the Los Angeles Times probably hundreds of times, more than anybody in the history of the world. And it's only because he offered that so many years ago, hasn't paid a penny for it. And yet he's probably gotten millions of dollars worth of advertising locally in the LA Times. So there's so many ways you can reach out to people. Today, most newspapers don't have a religion editor anymore, but there's ways you can reach out to the local television, newspaper, other media sources. There's lots of things you can do, plus blogs and things like that. We don't advertise. Our team at Cooke Media Group, probably much like you guys, we don't ever advertise, and it's mostly word of mouth because we're out there constantly making connections with people. So I just think that there's so much we can do. I think many pastors and communication directors, media directors get hung up on the fact that I don't have a massive budget. Well, let me tell you, there's a lot of things you could do without a budget. And the other issue along this line is volunteers. Over and over, I'm in meetings with churches that say, well, we can't do what Elevation Church does, or Life Church, or Hillsong does because they have a huge, highly paid staff. Well, no, they don't. I was in a meeting the other day, and we were talking about Stephen Furtick at Elevation, and I texted his television director, and I said, "How many of your camera crew and your whole TV production team are paid?" He said, "One guy, just one guy. Everybody else is volunteer." If you'll take the time to train your volunteers, you'd be stunned at how much you can learn from them and how much you can get them to do stuff. It's really quite remarkable. And let me say one last thing, who goes to your church? Ken Foreman, a pastor up in San Jose. I went to college with him a number of years ago. He was thinking, you know what? I really don't know what my church members do for a living. So he literally did a survey, and he discovered they had something like 18 dentists in his church. So he got him over to his house one night and said, "Guys, what can we do?" And they launched a ministry that today is the largest free dental clinic in the entire San Francisco Bay Area. It's been featured on USA Today, on ABC, on NBC. In fact, USA Network sent me up there to do a story about it for the USA Network. No Christian sources. These are all secular sources that are blown away by how extensive this free dental clinic is up there. And it all started from just finding out who goes to your church. What do they do for a living? Another church in Vancouver did the same thing and discovered they had tons of beauticians in their church, hairstylists. And they launched a ministry to homeless women in the Vancouver area, helping them do makeovers, because they said, boy, I tell you do a makeover with a homeless woman, it completely changes her perspective. Yeah. And so just finding out what your people do, how to mobilize volunteers, you can do some remarkable things.
Well, at my church, when we went from one campus to two campuses, this is a while ago. That's a big deal, like, because you have to figure out how to broadcast. Unbeknownst to us, sitting in our congregation, a member of our church was the producer for Arizona Diamondback baseball. You think maybe he has an idea on how to take this from 1 to 2 campuses?
No kidding. No kidding.
So you're absolutely right. You have no idea who's sitting in your congregation.
Yeah, just amazing.
Yeah, that is a really good point. Well, let's kind of bring things to a close here. We could go on forever. There's actually a whole other list of questions that I wanted to talk to you, and hopefully we've made a good impression and we can
Sorry,
get you back
I've been ranting. I apologize for that.
No,
We
this
wanted
has been yeah, this has been fantastic. But yeah, I've got a note sheet here, but I've got a whole other set of questions and things that I wanted to talk to you about, and I knew we weren't going to get to them in this time that we had together today. So maybe we can do it again sometime. Why don't you share with us what's next for Phil Cooke? What are the things that you have coming up on the horizon, and what are some things that we can be looking for from you?
Well, it's funny. The thing that really gets my blood pumping is ministries and churches that have a real vision for something different. We got a call a few years ago from a small ministry, one woman ministry in Atlanta, Ann White. And she asked me to come in and just talk to her about branding her ministry, kind of repositioning it to help her launch. And she was so small, I didn't want to do it. And my wife talked me into it. And we go down there, we met with her, and we ended up building her, redoing her website, renaming her ministry, completely changing everything about it. She has a passion for teaching the Bible to at-risk women. So she was training teachers to go into the Cooke County prison system, jail system there in Atlanta, and teach the Bible to these women who were battered women, addicted, people who had been addicted to drugs and alcohol, women who were in prison. And we did some research, and we found out that she had she's a brilliant writer. She decided she wanted to make a study Bible with all her study notes in it for these women. And so we started researching and discovered, hey, if you're running from a husband who's beaten you for the last few years, you're just taking the clothes on your back, maybe your kids, you don't have time for a big, thick study Bible, lugging that around. And so we decided everybody's got a phone, and even in prison, they have phones. So maybe we start making an app to use on phones or digital tablets. And then we discovered that women who have been beaten by men for the last 6 or 8 years, the last thing in the world they want to hear is the Bible read by a man's voice. And so we started looking for apps, Bible apps, the Bible recordings with women, and there were none. Nobody had ever recorded the Bible entirely with women's voices. So we did it. We did the whole project, the entire Bible. We did it out here in a big studio here in Los Angeles, and it's up. Courage for Life is the name of the ministry. And right now that app is on about 68 digital tablets, on 68,000 digital tablets in the prison systems in Missouri, Georgia, and I think it's moving into Alabama. And now we're working on the same thing in a Spanish version. So just, ministries that are open to trying new things just really interest me. And she was just willing to say, okay, let's look at the research. Let's see what's working, what's not working, and let's try something different. And as a result, we ended up with the first audio Bible ever recorded with entirely women's voices. So it's not my normal television thing. It's not our normal video thing, but it was just a fascinating thing. And it's made such a huge, the White House now has their prison, the team that's working on prison reform. They're looking at it to see how they could use it because it's made such an impact out there. So I'm just constantly fascinated with ministry leaders that have a real vision.
Well, and the point there is listen to your wife.
Well, yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, Kathleen's a lot smarter than me. There's no question about that. So that's a good point. Good point.
Phil, that's really neat. I appreciate you sharing that with us because, obviously when someone writes books and you read their books, you kind of get a feel, or you think you get a feel for who that person is. And of course, we see your media, we see your production, we see the stories that you tell. And of course, you kind of make some assumptions and draw some conclusions, but, sharing that story right there, thanks to Kathleen, that's just gold. That's just absolutely, that's absolutely gold. Thank you. Hey, Phil, thank you so much for spending the time with us today. If any of our listeners or video watchers are interested in finding out more about what you're doing or they want to connect with you, what are the best ways for them to do
the
that?
hub for me is philcooke.com. That's my blog, and you can find my social media there. I'm at Phil Cooke with an E on Instagram, Twitter, and Phil Cooke on social, on Facebook. But my blog is really, everything starts there, and you can reach out to me from the blog. If you have questions or something you want to run by me, feel free to do it. You can do it through my blog. So check out philcooke.com. You can order the book from there if you want to. There's so many options there. So that'd be the place.
Hey, this is kind of a side note, and if I'm wrong, you can correct me. But I heard this when you were interviewed by Katie. Did you start a nonprofit?
Yeah,
that is kind of connected with the book in some way. I'm sorry, we could have talked about this earlier, but
you guys would actually love this. We've been inundated over the years with Christians reaching out internationally, people in Africa, Asia, South America, wanting to have media training. They want to know, how do I use short films and social media to really reach the lost in our area? And so we've had a couple of things where we've taken groups from Hollywood, high-level Christians in the industry, directors of photography, producers, screenwriters, social media experts. We've taken teams. We took one team to Cairo, did a week training with a church there that's producing 80 hours of broadcast television beamed into the Muslim world via satellite. And we were just paying for it ourselves. And so we finally, that was beginning to be a struggle. So we've got so many requests. We launched a nonprofit called the Influence Lab. You can check it out at influencelab.com. And we just use it to kind of raise enough money to help us continue that work of teaching international folks how to use media for the gospel. And you can actually go to influencematters.com, order my book through a donation there. I'll autograph it for you. And that would be a great way to donate to the Influence Lab and get a copy of the book. So influencematters.com would be that place. Thank you for asking about that, by the way.
Yeah.
You're very welcome. I'm glad that I did. That's awesome. We really appreciate you. Thanks again for spending the time with us today, Phil.
Phil,
it's been great.
Ministry. Appreciate it.